Hello and welcome to the Glassworks Music Podcast with me, Ben Wallis, and Charlie Thorogood.
You right?
And Mr. Field, Mr.
Hey.
Robert Field.
How's it going? You alright?
Yeah, how are you?
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
That's all right. So this episode is going to be based on punk because we've got Mr. Field joining us today. So the way this episode is going to go is we're going to introduce Mr. Field and the punk genre for those of you who aren't aware of it. Then we're going to interview you, and we was going to do music festivals with Charlie, but that's going to be delayed till next week.
Yeah.
I'm guessing. And then we're going to review some punk songs as well.
Cool.
So we've got quite a packed episode. So would you mind introducing yourself and the genre that you represent, Mr. Field?
What do you want me to tell you about myself?
Well, just basically tell us a little bit about the punk genre and how it has shaped the music industry.
So, for punk for me, because, a few people have kind of different definitions of it. Some of the early rock and roll pioneers could be kind of seen as early punk, but for me it kind of starts off in the mid to late 70s with the Ramones and the Stooges and New York Dolls, so that kind of New York kind of scene. That quickly makes its way over to the UK, so you get bands from then on, like the Damned, the Clash, the Sex Pistols. It kind of moves from there on. In the 80s it kind of fizzles away a little bit. I kind of like to think of it as evolving though. So in America, it becomes kind of really kind of heavy and hardcore. You get bands like Black Flag, Minor Threat. In the UK, it goes the opposite way. It gets kind of softer, for the want of a better word. And you have like new wave bands. So you've got, like The Cure, Susie and the Banshees. And that eventually kind of moves even further forward, and you end up with like Smiths. You get the 90s kind of come along. So yeah, it's a really evolving genre, but yeah, the 90s come along and then you get bands kind of a resurgence of it with No Effects and Bad Religion.
Yeah,
kind of take that original sound but maybe make it a little bit poppier, and then from there you get Green Day and you Blink-182s, and then it kind of evolves to what we have now. I guess
does it take its roots from rock, or is it the opposite of that?
I think its roots are very heavily in rock and roll. The Ramones were essentially just playing they were playing original songs, but they just sounded like Beach Boys songs with heavy guitars.
How long? Well, if we call it a career, how long have you been playing in punk? Like how many years?
I joined my first punk band when I was technically I joined my first punk band about 15 years ago.
Wow, that's quite expansive.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, so when I was 15, I got a guitar that Christmas, and 2 days later on the 27th, I go to my best friend Devin. I go to his house, and he'd just got a drum kit. Neither of us knew how to play it. We had another friend called Matt who was a really good guitarist, and then we just decided we were going to be a band. We were playing like punk stuff. We were really bad because we didn't know how to play our instruments,
right,
obviously.
But you get better over time.
But yeah, that for me, that's the kind of punk ethos, really. It doesn't really matter how kind of necessarily a technical ability is. It's kind of it's a picking up and a doing it yourself kind of attitude.
So Charlie, have you got any experience in punk at all, or is it new to you?
Well, like I said, it's a later on music that I've really listened to, like Blink-182 and Green Day, because
Green Day, they're a punk band, aren't they?
Yeah, Green Day's like one of the kind of modern pop punk kind of pioneers, really.
I mean, the rest of it, I've heard the names, never listened to them. I don't know if it's ever got round to listening to them, or it's just that.
I think Green Day is one of the few modern punk bands that is played on the radio station, stuff like that.
Yeah, within reason. I mean, if you go for daytime radio, then yeah, you're probably right. I mean, there are a couple of others, I imagine. I know it's really tough. It all depends on what your genre, your definition of punk is, because a band like.
It's
maybe exactly, and it's such a contested thing about what is punk, and you'll hear a lot, someone saying that's not punk. For me, if you call it punk and you have that kind of attitude, then it is punk rock. But like a band like You Me at Six or Neck Deep, for example, they're really heavily contested to say if they're punk rock, because they're very, very, very poppy at the same time. For me, I mean, neither of those bands are necessarily what I listen to, but I don't really feel that I'm one to say, oh, that's not punk rock, because they probably grew up listening to a lot of the same bands that I did. They probably they loved the Get Up Kids and Newfound Glory and Blink-182 and the Clash and stuff like that. So who am I to say, oh, you're not a punk band?
Do you think that there is any stereotyping in the genre?
Oh, massively. Yeah. I mean, like, if you say to someone who doesn't know punk rock at all, they'll probably, and you ask them to draw what a typical punk looks like, I'd imagine be wearing a leather jacket and have a mohawk.
Dyed hair, stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. And there is a part of punk which I guess does conform to that, but for me, like the stereotypes are kind of not always necessarily right, because there's a lot of people who class themselves to be punk who who don't necessarily dress in that way. I used to when I was kind of when I was a lot younger. I was going to say a bit younger, a lot younger, when I was 14, 15.
Okay.
I really wanted to have blue hair. I tried dyeing it and it didn't go well because I have such dark hair. I didn't realise you had to bleach it first, and I definitely wasn't going to do that.
I bet your parents loved that phase.
As
all parents do.
Well, I don't know. Like, so I mean, if we talk about my history with punk rock, it very much stems from my parents.
Really?
Yeah. So both my parents were around in the original kind of UK phase of punk rock. So the late 70s, and they were in. So in 1977, when the Clash were really big, my dad was 20.
And that's 10 years younger than you.
Yeah, 10 years younger than what I am now, and he loved those bands. And really, my kind of didn't realise that I grew up on punk rock without really realising it. So when I started discovering my own bands that I liked when I was 13, 14, like every kid does, and then showing them to my dad, and he didn't really like a lot of them. He really didn't like Blink-182 and all these kind of bands and everything, because he said, that's not real punk rock. Like you were raised, and he said, you were raised on better punk rock than that.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, only as a joking kind of way.
Right. Okay.
The way that like parents do, really. If your parents like what you listen to, then you very quickly go off of it, I guess. But yeah, he was absolutely right, because without realising it, I loved bands like The Clash. The Clash especially, they're the one that I always kind of come back to. My parents had every single album on vinyl, which have now become mine because I don't really listen to records anymore.
I mean, on Monday we spoke about the transition of the way we listen to music.
Yeah.
And you just mentioned vinyls. Through doing some research, I found that vinyls were first invented and then later used in as far back as the 1880s, but they're coming back now. And if you look at the record sales of them, I know this isn't anything to do with punk, but it's an interesting point. They actually, in 2015, they sold more than CDs.
Yeah, well, when you say it's nothing to do with punk, but actually I think the resurgence of vinyl is incredibly punk rock, really, and the fact that we're coming at a point where the record. The music industry and the record companies are trying to tell us that you shouldn't be listening on this format, you should be listening on this format and this format, you need to be buying this. And it got to a point where a lot of people were saying, like, I have all these old records and they sound great, and I'd love to, like this record, I'd love to hear that on vinyl. Imagine how that would sound, how good that would sound on vinyl. So it was kind of like a bit of a two fingers up to the record companies and the music industry, and they had to kind of comply along with it. And now you have Sainsburys selling vinyl. Like that's insane.
I mean, Sainsburys is one of the four big brands. You got Tesco's, Asda, Morrison's, Sainsburys. I mean, if one of the big supermarkets is selling them, they've come back. Yeah,
100%. The downfall of that is that obviously it's starting to hurt some of the smaller record shops which were doing it way before them. Were obviously ahead of the trend. So Sainsburys Only, they sell. And I'm kind of getting on my soapbox here, Sainsburys will only sell the kind of the albums they'll know that will absolutely 100% sell.
Yeah, and make a profit on it.
Yeah, so there's nothing, there's no risk taken there. You have, Hotel California by the Eagles, and like Queen is Dead by the Smiths, and the Guardians of the Galaxy soundtrack. There's no real risk there. People are going to buy that. Whereas at record shops, so like Hot Salvation, for example, up here in Folkestone, I'll go up there and George will say to me, and he's someone I've known for a long time, but he will, so he knows my tastes. But even if one of you guys went in and he didn't know you, he would say, what kind of bands do you usually listen to? And he could give you something new to listen to that he'd think you'd like. And he knows so much. For me, that's that's punk rock. That's it's taking care of each other and helping out some of the smaller bands and getting you into like stuff you haven't heard because at the end of the day, you know, like the Guardians of the Galaxy soundtrack, I love that soundtrack.
That's
by the way.
yeah. They released the second volume of that. It's
But you
absolutely
know
brilliant.
what? Like it's on Spotify. All those big, you know, all those bands are perfectly big enough, and I don't really know how much I'd get out from listening to it on vinyl. But a band that has really meticulously taken the effort to make this album, I don't know. It's just obviously one person's opinion, but it's mine.
If we talk about the development of music, Charlie, I'd be interested to hear your point. Like, when was the last time you bought a CD or even a tape?
Well, I don't really, like we say, don't really buy CDs anymore. Got Spotify, you got YouTube. The last vinyl I bought was a Bastille album for my sister for her birthday. That was 2 years ago, but
Right.
it's alright. I find vinyls now, because of the technology we have, they've got a better sound to them. But the good thing about vinyls was it didn't have a perfect sound, but I thought that was better because it had the more...
I guess it all depends on what you classify as a better sound, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, there are some, like, I think they call them audiophiles, like people who are really meticulous and really like it. They're really not particular about how their music sounds and stuff, and they'll say vinyl sounds better. You get a fuller kind of frequency range. Whether that's true or not, I'm not so sure. I think it's like you say, Charlie. It's kind of like the experience that makes it sound better.
Exactly.
For me, it is anyway. You know, like, you know, it's so easy to just, you know, press a, you know, you're not even pressing buttons on your phone. You know, you'd like go onto Spotify really quickly on your phone, and you know, you've got a whole, you know, you've got literally pretty much everything kind of written down at the moment is all on Spotify apart from a new Taylor Swift album. But with a record, you know, it's the effort of, you know, going to your shelf, picking out from what you've got there, you know, getting it out of the sleeve, putting it on to your deck and kind of playing it from there. It's and then, you know, and usually you'll sit down and you listen to it. It's not like on, you know, with Spotify, I'm usually, you know, it's streaming. I you know, don't get me wrong, I love my Spotify account. I've had it for, you know, this is my kind of big hipster claim here. I was on Spotify when you had to have an invitation to be on it because it was so new in the UK. And I eventually moved it on to have a premium account and everything, and I love it. I use it all the time, but it's kind of a day-to-day kind of thing that I use it for. So, you know, I have it on when I'm marking, I have it on when I'm lesson planning, I have it on if I'm in the car or when I'm on the move. Whereas a record, you know...
you can't really build them into cars.
Well, yeah, exactly. So I'll put it down, I'll sit on my sofa and I'll, you know, and it, especially the old ones as well. I mean, just to kind of bring it back onto the punk thing as well. My favourite record out of my collection is the Clash London Calling. That was my dad's. He had it when, you know, he lived in a flat in a part of London called Forest Hill.
Right.
And you know, like at that point, it was just him and my uncle. They just lived together, and my dad looked after him. And yeah, he played that album, and he got my uncle into punk as well. And it's just a story that goes with it really. And that album was played during, you know, that vinyl was played in my childhood, in my sister's childhood, you know, and now it's kind of in my kind of present, and it's still got, like, I love it. It's still got the sticker that came with the album as well because they stuck it on there. And this is how punk rock the Clash were, even though that album sees them going away from. So I'm doing air quotes here. The real punk kind of sound. You know, they were punk rock enough to offer a double album for the price of a single one. You know. Just to kind of say, you know, we want you to hear this music, and this is two fingers up to the music industry. You know,
I think we've done a good job introducing Mr. Field and your genre.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
No worries.
If we move on to the interview part now,
yeah, go for it.
I've got 5 questions here,
but
this could take 20 minutes, could take 40. I mean,
no worries.
Just answer them to the best of your ability, I guess. So the first question is, how did you begin your musical journey and experience the punk genre, getting into bands, university degrees, and then teaching here at the Glassworks?
Okay, so yeah, to touch upon what I went earlier, so at 15 I got a Yamaha ERG 121 electric guitar, which I still own to this day. Came with a tiny little 10-watt practice amp and a cable and a book on how to, you know, beginner's guitar. and it had the opening chords to Paradise City by Guns N' Roses in it, and I spent the
cool.
rest of it. I didn't have a pick. The one thing my parents forgot to get me was a sodding pick. So you know, with all like my other Christmas presents was a jumper, and that had a tag on it. I took the tag off and used that as a pick, and I spent the rest of Christmas Day. I think I saw my parents at dinner, and then I spent the rest of it learning the opening chords to Paradise City. I was obsessed.
Amazing.
So this guitar, is it still in the best condition you
No,
have kept
not
it,
at all.
Or is it a bit
So it's like all
so
chipped and
I'll include the guitar in my journey.
Fair enough.
So yeah, like I say, 2 days later, my friend Devin and I decide that we're going to make the greatest pop punk band known to earth. He invites his friend Matt, who is this amazing guitar player, and he looked at my he got a 100-watt Marshall practice, not 100-watt practice, 100-watt Marshall amp for Christmas, which he brings to this basement that we're rehearsing in, and I turn up with my tiny little 10-watt amp, and he thinks it's hilarious. But we make a massive racket.
Neighbours come knocking.
Well, it was a soundproof basement.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, maybe the previous owners used it for murders or something. I don't know.
Was this one of the amps you could like clip onto your belt?
No. It was a bit like your PV amp, Ben. So just like a little kind of like a box.
Well, the PV amp's 15 watt,
yeah.
but it's probably the same sort of thing.
So yeah, kind of spend the next kind of while learning guitar, and that's during my GCSEs. I remember my English teacher was not happy that I'd started to play guitar. He was like, "You're meant to be focusing on your GCSE, you know, your English GCSE and stuff like that." But you know, like I'm 15 years old and I think I'm Joe Strummer or something, and he'd say, "Yeah, man, it's just about my art." So do horrifically bad on my GCSEs. My parents then move us from South East London down to Kent to a place called Greatstone.
So this is like during the 90s, I'm guessing, or 2000.
Sod. Yeah, 2003.
2000. Sorry. 2003.
Yeah, so 2003 we moved down to Greatstone, and I'm irate. I do not want to be there at all. I've moved from, you know, this
you moved
amazing.
from where you've grown up.
Yeah, I moved from where I've grown up, and this amazing kind of city where there's so much music going on to, you know, the back end of nowhere where there's a tiny train that goes past my house every day. So I'm not happy. And I applied to go. There was a school at the time called the Ashford School of Art, and I was really into art at that point.
Right.
As most young punks are, and I really wanted to go there. And my dad said, "Rob, why don't you just try going to Southlands, which is now known as Marsh Academy? You know, because you make some mates that are local." Appease him, and I go there, and they say you can do an AS in art,
which is half a A level.
Yeah, half an A level. But your GCSEs are so bad, that's the only AS level you can do. So I do that, and at the same time, so I'm year 12 at this point. There's a year 13 guy called Kai, who is basically got this connection to what he was calling the Canterbury hardcore scene. I was like, what the hell is that? And then we start kind of get a kind of bond going, talk about bands like The Cure and kind of the early punk stuff as well. And then we started jamming together with a guy called Dave, who he was a friend of mine that I decided he was going to play bass. He'd never picked up a guitar in his life, but I said, "You're going to be my bass player." But yeah, I really, really, really just wanted to be in a punk band. And at that point, it was more of a pop punk band actually. I really wanted to be Tom DeLonge from the original guitarist and singer from Blink-182.
So you have inspirations, which is a good.
Yeah, at that point, yeah. We just started jamming together. We started playing a few songs and everything. Started writing a few songs, and we play at Phase 2 Youth Club, which I believe is still there.
Wow.
In New Romney, and we play a gig under the name of Dr. Love and the Miserables, and we play I think a 20-minute set, and it's so bad. Like I think I still have nightmares about how bad that set was. But it exposed that was the first proper first gig I played, and I was just hooked from then on in. The Yamaha R at this point, to bring it back to Yamaha, is now covered in stickers. At this point, its journey isn't over yet.
So you might restore it. You could get it restored.
I have started to restore it. So yeah. So,
I mean, has it got an adjustable neck?
Yeah, I mean the neck on it is fine. It's just got covered in stickers. That was the main thing. The paint.
Peel them off
it's just the paintwork was a little bit ruined. But anyway,
that you hate your younger self for doing that.
No, because it was kind of where I was at the time.
It's the journey of it.
Yeah, I mean, I was also working at Music Bay in Cheriton at this point.
Really? So you got a job at this time?
Yeah. By the time and then they kind of said, because I spotted this cherry red. It was a brand called Westfield, and they did a kind of rip off of the Gibson ES335, which is like a big jazz guitar. And I loved it, mostly probably because Tom DeLonge was playing one at the time as well. And then I worked really hard over like school holidays and stuff as well, and they let me have that. And I still have that guitar. That's in perfect condition. I love that guitar. And I started playing gigs with that. Dr. Love and the Miserables kind of keeps on going. We play a couple of gigs. We play like the harp in Folkestone and a couple other bits. And then we move, and then we get the guy. So at that first gig I was telling you about, there's a guy there called Andy, and he was a great singer, and I wasn't. I'd say.
Wait, so you've sung before?
I sung at that band, yeah.
You still do, don't you?
I every now and then, but you know, I'm a guitarist more than I'm a singer. So Andy joins as rhythm guitar, as singer, and we changed the name and changed the direction. So we changed the name to a band called Forever Red, which is named after a Power Rangers episode. And from then on in, you know, my addiction to playing music is just like, it is triples, quadruples, keeps on going on and on and on. And you know, the connections that Andy has, because he was in a big band called Number One Defender, who were like, they were signed, man. Number One Defender was signed. No, I wasn't friends with anyone who was in signed bands.
So it was
a big deal. And using his contacts, we were playing so many gigs. You know, we played Phase 2 and stuff where we were kind of like local heroes, because that's where we practiced. You know, we were, you know, playing in Ashford and playing in Folkestone, playing in Canterbury. So then we played up north as well. We played a couple of gigs in London.
I guess this leads on to my next question. If you've
I've got loads of other history, but I'm going to tell you that later.
Awesome. So if you could sum up the punk genre, how would you describe it, and what would you say to aspiring punk musicians?
Well, to an aspiring punk musician is, don't get too obsessed with the word punk itself. Do what you think sounds good. You know, that's the real ethos of punk. Do what you want. You know, ironically, when the Clash did London Calling, you know, the music wasn't necessarily what people deemed to be punk rock. But what they did was actually the most punk thing ever, by doing songs that weren't necessarily kind of punk in sound. So they were using jazz chords and blues chords and reggae samples and stuff like that. So by them doing that and going on a journey of moving away from punk and saying we're going to do what the hell we want, that's the most punk rock thing you can do.
So,
are you implying that the punk genre is just because it doesn't really fall into a category of?
Well, I mean, the overall music probably does. It falls in the category of kind of heavy rock music, I guess. But the attitude is the more thing that is punk, really. So, you know, you could be in an indie band and be punk. You could be a rapper and be punk, really, because you're doing whatever you want.
So, being in several bands is the third question. How would you depict the experience of being in a band, and how can people check out your music on the various musical platforms?
Forever Red's MySpace is still going. So yeah, so if you ever want to hear that one, that is myspace.com/Forever Red Music, and hear songs that are inspired by War of the Worlds, punk songs inspired by War of the Worlds.
H.G. Wells.
Yeah, but yeah, that band kind of we stopped doing that when I went to uni. So I went to uni in 2007. I kind of, you know, I built myself back up. I got myself my BTECs in music technology. So this is what's going on in the background. I'm like falling in love with like studio craft and stuff like that, as well as the bands and everything I'm doing. So I do enough to get myself a place at Southampton Solent University. Oh, I was in a hip-hop band between that as well, which was a bit random, yeah. With some friends from college. That lasted the best part of 5 minutes, though. They did loads of stuff without me. They were called Shyclo. Great, yeah, really nice group of guys, really talented. And they did loads once I left, they did quite a bit without me. So I joined another pop punk band with my friends Ross, Toby and Ant. If you're interested to see what Ant's doing, he was on Don't Tell the Bride not too long ago.
Really?
Yeah,
that's on E4, isn't it?
Yeah. So we made a band called At Odds. We played a few shows. That was quite fun.
Yeah.
Released an EP that we recorded ourselves. But the big one after that was in my third year at uni. I joined a band called Marwood, which was with one of my best friends, Jim, and some other people we kind of knew at uni, so Adam, Tom and Ollie. And that was inspired. So that one's on Bandcamp as well. I think if you go Marwood, Southampton Bandcamp, we've got 2 EPs still up there. That was probably the most successful band I've ever done in terms of the amount of gigs we played and the bands that we played with. So I mean, one of the tracks I'll play you later is a band called Iron Chic, who are an American punk band made up of kind of guys from... They're kind of new, but they're made up of old punk bands as well. So ones that are big, like I think there's a few members from a band called Latterman in there, and we got to play with them in Southampton, which still blows my mind that we got to play with that band, even thinking about it now. But we got to play with another band called the Wonder Years.
That's a cool name.
Yeah, and the Wonder Years like are fairly big as well. They're obviously not daytime radio big, but you know they're fairly big. We got to play with a band called Our Time Down Here, who are a Southampton band, but they eventually, like some of the members from those have gone to form a band called Creeper, which some of you listeners might have heard of. So Creeper are, you know, taken the world by storm now. Those guys are doing so well, and deservedly so as well. They're such nice guys. So yeah, Marwood was kind of my probably the biggest band I've done, and you know the bands that we played with, and you know we wrote our second EP is called Anchor Ridge, and it's still probably the favourite EP that I've released. You know, with something I've done, I was incredibly proud of our songwriting on that.
You've had quite a big journey though.
Yeah. I mean, all at the same time. There's a background. I'm constantly learning about my studio craft and stuff like that. So learning how to record bands. I did 6 months interning at the Ranch recording studio just outside of Southampton as well, with Neil Kennedy and Jeff Swan and Lewis Johns. Those three guys are fantastic producers, absolutely amazing producers. And the Ranch has like doubled in size since I've been there. You know, they're recording.
Quite a big one though.
Yeah, and they're recording bands. You know, like Lewis recorded Funeral for a Friend a couple of years ago. They've been recording the Creeper stuff. They've been recording a band called Muncie Girls, who are great. A band called Milk Teeth. Milk Teeth are a fantastic UK
good name,
like British punk band.
Yeah,
absolutely fantastic. I mean, you want to see how punk can be in the mainstream. One of their songs was used on. I don't know if you watch that Sunday morning show, Sunday Brunch.
I've seen that.
Yeah. Like when they go to an ad break, they always play a track. They played a track by Milk Teeth the other day. That's a British punk band.
That's pretty cool.
And that was recorded. That was recorded at a recording studio I used to work at by a guy who deserves all the recognition in the world. Neil's great.
So for the listeners who want to start a band, what would you recommend they do?
Pick up some instruments, find some friends, and find a space where you can make some racket. Yeah, so again, it's the whole kind of punk ethos thing of doing it yourself. So, in the background of all of this as well. So, for Forever Ed, the band that are based in Kent, the reason, I said about Andy's contacts getting us loads of shows, but another reason we played so many gigs was also because we were struggling to begin with to find shows. So, I thought, you know what, rather than that, I'm just going to do it myself. So I would book out places like I booked out the Harp Club and Phase 2 and Downtown Diner in Ashford when it was still there.
Yeah.
I just did it myself, really. One of the best ones we did was Halloween 2005, where Andy and I put it on together because for some reason we thought it'd be a good idea to put on 7 bands in one night. But
that's a lot.
Yeah, it's tons of bands. But, they were all happy with just playing like short 15, 20-minute sets. And it was great, like the amount of bands that got to play on that show that and bands that I don't even think of anymore. There's a band called the Black Veins, which were a Norwich-based punk band. Like they're amazing. They're really, really good. Like heavy as like super heavy, but and like super loud and aggressive. But such a great band.
So, is there anyone in the music industry in the present time that inspires you? And in reverse to that, is there any older, perhaps late musicians that inspire you at the moment, like George Michael or people who aren't around?
I mean, my biggest inspirations in terms of like overall. I have a tattoo of Johnny Cash on my arm. Johnny Cash is
have or had.
Have.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, once you get a tattoo, it's quite hard to remove them.
So yeah, I still like the tattoo. That's why it's still there. But yeah, Johnny Cash is a huge, an influence in a lot of the things he does, not in other things. So Johnny Cash is obviously a huge kind of drug abuser.
Wow.
But that's not me and whatsoever.
No.
But the fact that he, in a time where everyone was kind of thinking that rock and roll was going to be and they were right, rock and roll was a big thing, but he still liked playing his kind of his country music.
The thing there is, from what I picked up, rock and roll sort of petered out in the late 90s, whereas punk is still around now. You got bands like Green Day, Blink 182. I mean, rock and roll is not as big as it used to be, whereas punk is still.
I don't know, Ben. Actually, rock and roll is, like it all comes down to what your definition of rock and roll is. If you're talking about the stuff that Elvis made, then yeah, massively.
Yeah.
But that dwindled down way before the 90s. That dwindled down, like
60s, maybe not.
yeah, 60s, because it kind of evolved. Yeah,
when
you're
Elvis-
right, Charlie, because it kind of evolved into what the Beatles were doing, and then
They were
I
around
guess, and
since
then
the 70s.
in the 70s, you've got, obviously becomes a lot kind of heavier and harder. Rock and roll is an evolution for me. It's always an evolution, and as is punk music.
continue as well.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing ever really, like in terms of that kind of music, I don't think anything really dies. It just kind of moves on to its next phase.
Right.
Um,
So
It would only die when no one stops listening to it. And
we shall probably
the chance of that.
very slim.
I
Yeah.
mean, Elvis, despite being dead and having his debut like just after the war, he's still quite listened to. He's still quite
Yeah, by
renowned
me
artist.
as well.
a little less
Elvis.
conversation
He's still
was
selling
relaxed.
records.
But yeah, coming back to the original questions, yeah, like Joe Strummer, Johnny Cash, probably Tom DeLonge from Blink-182 still did. He he inspired me when I was a teenager and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know. To be honest
It's a
with you,
difficult question, isn't it?
yeah,
Sometimes.
it's quite a tough one in terms of production. There's loads of guys in production. So like Jeff Emerick and George Martin, what they did with the Beatles in the 60s is a massive inspiration to how I record now. Mostly because I did a huge project on how they recorded as well, so I kind of know all the ins and outs of that. Yeah, I don't know, to be completely honest, anyone who kind of does things their own way and that I might like, but I kind of learned a little while ago when I was interviewing bands, kind of like how you're doing now, to not overly idolize people because they're just human beings at the end of the day.
So, a final question. What's next for you, and do you plan to release any other form of music, such as solo songs, or a type of music that isn't your main genre?
Well, I mean, I play in two bands at the moment, one of which is like a functions band, so they probably won't be really releasing anything because we kind of just...
Or
play.
making at the same time?
Yeah, because play covers really, but that's really fun.
Get
But
to-
yeah, the other band is a punk band, so I'm in a punk band called Hands Up at the moment, which is... There are four of us, three of whom are teachers, and one of which worked for the council. Well, we were originally a three-piece, like really loud and snotty with no bass. Kind of, we wanted to make it a little bit better. So I said I'd go on bass, and we brought Jim, who was in Marwood. He's now playing guitar for us. He's the one who he's one who works for the council. And yeah, we've kind of taken a slightly different take on the punk genre, I guess. The music isn't reinventing the wheel by any means whatsoever, but the lyrics are written by our singer's 6-year-old daughter, so like it's really interesting to hear a 6-year-old's kind of random thoughts being put over this really kind of heavy kind of punk track.
It's quite
Great idea.
it's quite a good idea. It's a
Yeah,
good
like
idea.
I love it because it's a kind of, in theory it's weird that no one's done it. Because a 6-year-old's thoughts are probably super punk because they don't care, she came home from school one day. There was a new kid at school who was really nice to her. So the lyrics in one of the choruses is Emily is nice to me, and I think she wears light up shoes we made stick on tattoos. Emily is nice to me. And that was just her thoughts for the day.
That's quite. I like that. Yeah,
I mean, we recorded that. We recorded that with Magpie Studios just outside Ashford.
Is that the name of the song? Emily is nice to me.
It's just called Nice to Me. Yeah.
It's a good idea. Well, I think that wraps up the interview part of this podcast. We was going to do a feature on Charlie. You was looking into music festivals, but obviously you haven't got that ready yet. So we'll possibly be able to do that next week. The last part of this podcast, we're going to have a look at some punk songs now that Mr. Field has brought in. So, who have you brought in for us?
Band music as well.
I'm just going to get a
Just,
quick
I
drink.
don't actually have it with me.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I would usually. Yeah, if anyone is interested, yeah, just look up the bands either Forever Red or Marwood. They're the ones I'd say probably look into.
Are you able to play any for us today?
Yeah, I can play. I can't play any of mine. I don't have any of mine on me.
That's right.
But this is a band called Iron Chic. I'll play a little bit of it.
Okay. So if we listen to like 20 seconds of it or so.
Yeah. If it works.
Remember, we used Spotify last week. I think something's coming
Oh,
through.
yeah, there we go. Sorry, I'll just get forward there. We haven't got any monitoring here, but yeah.
This is sort of like your generic punk, I'd say, like Roots maybe.
I guess so. Yeah, it's very, like, for me, it's very poppy. So it's got that kind of it's very melodic. I'll see what else I've got in here.
So that was Iron Cheek.
That's Iron Chic, yeah. I mean, these guys I really like as well. These are a band called Japan Droids, and it's just two of them. It's just a guitarist, drummer, and a guitarist sings as well. I'll just play anything off of here.
Again, that's sort of like what you expect from the punk genre.
Yeah.
Are these big bands that you're playing at the moment? Iron Cheek, I've heard of them, but not this one's...
Fairly. I mean, if you ask most punks, I'll probably say they're the biggest bands in the world, but you're obviously you're not going to hear them on daytime radio.
I mean, Green Day get played on the radio, don't they?
Yeah. What else?
It's quite lively, isn't it? It's the kind of music festival or like music show I would want to go to.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
It just seemed...
You said last week you went to the BBC Music Awards. What sort of music did you experience there? Charlie?
It was, of course, it was a music awards, so it was a huge mix of it. I mean, Coldplay were there. They were amazing live.
Like general, like sort of...
Because it's not just the music they do,
alternative rock.
but it's the show they put on, because they have strobe lights, lasers. They give you clip-on wristbands which have LED lights in. I don't think they turned them off until the next day. So we went back to the hotel and these things were still on, really bright. So I think they ran out afterwards, but they were remotely turned on.
Oh really?
We couldn't figure out how they were turned on because they only went on during the Coldplay songs, and we thought we should have had them on. Should have just kept them on for the whole thing.
Oh, it made more sense.
Ed Sheeran was up there.
So yeah, we spoke last week that he does do a bit of rap because last week we had Adam on. Did you see any punk bands?
I don't think so.
No, it was BBC Music Awards, obviously.
Oh, you never know.
You never know. That was say like the bands like Milk Teeth and stuff are coming through. So BBC introduced and stuff. They'll probably be on.
Stormzy was up there.
Another rap artist, like grime sort of.
I can't remember his name now. It's really bad because he's like.
But you enjoyed it.
Big. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. One Direction were up there. I mean, I know people slate them, but they weren't that bad, to be honest, because it was at getting to the time where they weren't the fangirl boy band. They were becoming to a proper adult boy band doing good music and not singing Why Someone's Beautiful.
Man, Harry Styles' solo album's great. I really love that album. I think it's really cool.
So
they've all kind of parted ways now. I think One Direction's just
they broke up
into shadows now, really.
Have you got any other bands that you want to play for us today?
This is a fairly older one. These guys are fairly well known. It's a band called Gaslight Anthem, who aren't going anymore, but I know Brian Fallon, the singer from there, is releasing a solo album. If you want to talk about people who do inspire me, I love Brian Fallon, but just because it's a bit of a style thing, I guess, and like he plays kind of punk music with kind of with like Bruce Springsteen kind of roots. That's someone else who inspires me. Bruce Springsteen massively. This is a song called Drive. But yeah, I mean, I'm obviously playing like three fairly melodic kind of punk tracks, but there's so many subgenres of punk rock. So like, you could have a band who are like more hardcore. See if I can get anything to work while this is playing.
So just interestingly, going back to the listening to music point, you use Spotify. You just use Spotify instead of like CDs and stuff.
Oh yeah, massively. So this is a band I'm just going to play. These are called Minor Threat. So this is a kind of example of the less poppy kind of punk stuff.
All right.
If it wants to work.
A bit heavier.
I'd say it's more like roots rock, like more like punk, like deep punk.
Well, it's certainly punk rock. Yeah. But yeah, not any kind of focus on the necessarily of the singing. It's more like shouting and like getting the point is like you're aggressive.
Thank you for for showing us these. No
worries.
Introduce sort of like showing off the punk genre because it really envelops a lot of different genres that you probably wouldn't expect. I mean, like,
yeah. I mean, a lot
yeah.
of people who, we classify to be quite famous now might not have their roots in punk, but certainly like it. I went to Hop Farm Festival a few years ago, and the Eagles were headlining it. I was working at Hop Farm, but the Eagles were headlining it.
You worked at that farm?
Yeah, I worked at Hop Farm. And Joe Walsh, a guitarist from the Eagles. Now the Eagles are like one of the biggest kind of American country rock bands in the world. But the guitarist Joe Walsh was wearing a Ramones t-shirt. And this isn't necessarily a good thing, but you go into places like Topshop and Primark and whatever, and you'll see Ramones t-shirts. The ones with the Eagles and the names around them and stuff like that, or Misfits t-shirts. So like a t-shirt of like a massive kind of, it looks like a skull, but I think it's called the Crimson Ghost. So kind of using that into the mainstream element of it, but it's not something I particularly like, but it doesn't really bother me on a day-to-day kind of time. It's not something I lose sleep over.
I think a big one for the band merchandise for clothing would be Nirvana.
Nirvana were heavily influenced by punk rock music as well. Very heavily influenced by punk rock music. But Nirvana are huge for kind of merchandising. Whether Kurt Cobain would have approved of that if he was alive today, I don't necessarily think so. But
well, I think this wraps up the second episode of the podcast.
Cool.
Yeah.
Unless there's anything else that anyone wants to add.
No.
So thank you very much for doing this, Mr. Field.
No, my pleasure.
Yeah, and Charlie as well, of course.
Have that ready for next week.
So so this brings an end to episode 2 of the Glassworks Music Podcast. We'll be back next week. Make sure you tune in because we'll be interviewing Anthony Pace and Joseph Himbury, who are in a rap band. I'm actually the drummer for that band as well, so we can call to get them on. Are you back next week, Charlie?
I will be.
Awesome. We'll be focusing on grime next week, so make sure you check us out on SoundCloud and of course YouTube as well. Thank you for listening. We're back next week.